Hey card making friends, it's Sandy here. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to make some bridge cards and show you how I did it. These are fun little pop-up cards and then they fold flat and fit into an A2 sized envelope, which is very cool. And look at that star, isn't it beautiful? And if you stay to the end of the video, I have 4 more different samples to share with you today. Okay, so what I'm using are mainly the barn star and the Country Snowman dies. My embossing folder is the Country Christmas embossing folder, and the sentiments are the July Bitter Press Club Festive Press. Also, I am using the Spellbinders Stitch Dots Scallop Borders to create the bridge on my cards. I'm using the Spellbinders 12-inch paper trimmer and scorer because it obviously trims and scores, and we're going to start by cutting out the base. I'm going to use white cardstock 4 1/4 by 8, and what we're going to do is we're going to score it at 1 1/4, 2 1/2, 5 1/2, and 6 3/4. Okay, so I'm starting with 4 1/4 by 8, and I'm going to move the cutting part out of the way. I'm going to pull out the arm. This is a great paper cutter. You can cut 12 by 12 paper if you want to, but I need that arm in order to score the 6 3/4 because it's on the arm. So starting from the left-hand side and pushing my card in, or cardstock, I'm starting at 1 1/4 for my first score, and I like to score up because then it keeps the paper aligned with the top of the cutter, keeping everything nice and straight. Next score is at 2 1/2. Then I'm moving over to 5 1/2. And then extending to the arm, we're going to 6 3/4. And again, this creates the base of your card. So you can make it out of whatever color you want. I just decided to use white. So I'm going to play with some pattern paper. And if you have 12 by 12 pattern paper, then don't worry about the pattern. 6 by 8, same thing. If you're playing with the 6 by 6, there's a bit of a trick here because it's not long enough to do everything in one cut. So if you have longer paper, you're going to cut it at 4 by 6 3/4. I don't. So I'm going to show you how to cut up a 6 by 6. And I'm looking for this red with the dots, because the dots go along with one of the scallop borders that we're going to use for the bridge. And I like it when I duplicate my patterns in my cards. Okay, so we're going to start and we're going to use the cutter this time. So I'm bringing that down. We're going to line up at 4 inches and we're going to cut a strip. Save this piece. We're going to be using it at the end. Turn your paper the other way. Okay, and next thing we're going to do is we are going to cut this up. So we're going to cut 1 inch. So I'm just going to line that up at 1. And you want to be pretty precise on your cutting because if you don't, it kind of shows. We're going to do another one at 1 inch. Okay, and I'm holding on to my paper just to make sure that it doesn't move around too much. I'm going to do a third one at 1 inch. And then this last piece, I'm going to cut to 2 3/4, and that's the middle piece. So as you notice, when I put this down on my sample over on the left, I need one more strip of a 1 inch, and that's where this little guy's coming in. We're going to line it up at 4, then we're going to turn it long ways, and we're going to cut that one final 1 inch strip. Okay, lining it up, giving it a little cut. Those 2 papers on the right are scrap for another project, and now we have all of our pieces. And I'm just going to fold the arm back in on this handy dandy cutter so I can store it away. All right, so now we need to score. So the first we're going to do is fold it on top of itself and score. I got a piece of something on the end of my bone folder. Okay, then back out and score again. Do the same thing on the other side. Fold on top of itself to score, and then back on itself for the second one. Okay, and this creates the back panel. And I'm just going to turn these. I like to do this. I like to keep everything in order. And especially if you have a pattern on your paper, you want to make sure that you keep it in order. Using a tape runner, I'm just going to quickly attach all of these pieces. And I like to start on one side, work my way to the other, and then that way I can line up the top and the bottom edges. except when we get to the centerpiece, because I'm going to turn my panel so that I can line it up on all four sides. Okay, and then turning it again, I'm going to add my last two pieces. So this creates your card base. And as I said, you can do it in any color that you want. I'm going to show you a little bit down the road where I actually had a colored card base and I used the embossing folder to emboss the white panels for the overlay, and it's really pretty as well. Okay, so we got all those done. We're ready to move on to the bridge. Okay, so as I said, we're using the Stitch and Dot scallop border, and I have cut one with the dots on it. I really like that it duplicates my pattern paper, and it is a little bit longer than the card, which is great, and we're going to be gluing it to the two outside panels. And I'm pointing to my grid because I like to use my Spellbinders grid paper for this. I line up my base on those lines, and you want to keep this as square as possible so that it lays flat when you flatten it to stick it into your envelope. And I'm just going to zoom in here in a second. I'm dry fitting that bridge panel, and I'm going to use a couple of my binding clips from quilting to hold it in place to let it dry. So I've got those set up, and I've got my Barely Art glue, and I'm going to add a little bit of glue to either side. There, zoom in for you so you can see it a little bit better. See, so my square is nicely lined up, and I'm adding my glue, and then it's a good idea to use the glue because you may need a couple of seconds to reposition this to make sure that it's even on both sides. You don't want one scallop longer than the other type of thing. Well, at least I don't like it. I like everything nice and neat and tidy. Okay, so I have glued it into place. I'm adding my clips, and I'm just going to set that aside and let it dry. But I'm just showing you that it will go flat both ways. Very cool, right? Okay, moving on, we're going to create our embellishments, and I'm going to start with the barn star. I have everything pre-cut, so just to save time for the video. And you're going to start with a star and this big piece, and you need two of them, and I like a light and a dark. And then we have these little die cut panels. There's one that's a filigree, and then there's one that's all dots. And what you're going to do is place these over top of your star, and then add a little bit of tape to hold them in place. Run them through your die cutting machine until you get all 5 of them cut out, and then that's your overlay for the base. So you're going to flip it to the back and add some glue. And I just went around the outside edges and then a little bit in the middle, and that was plenty. And you're going to glue it down to your base. And you'll see at the end of the video when I show you the other 4 cards, I've got a few different color combinations going on there. And I really like this filigree. It's really pretty. Okay, so you just want to make sure that they're nice and even. They're overlapped. Everything is kind of glued down. We're going to set that aside and move on to our other pieces. There's a pretty little bow in the die set, and you have your choice between 2 tails, a short one and a long one. And these 2 dies cut all the pieces that you need. So you've got your little loops at the top. You're going to add a little bit of glue to that and then pick one of your tails. I like the long one. And then there's a little knot overlay. Just picking that up there and adding it. So that's it for the bow. Just making sure everything's straight and then taking the piece I don't need and moving on. There's pine cones. So you cut a base and then a top, and I did those in light and dark brown. Adding a little bit of glue around the outside edge. Okay, and you're just going to quickly glue both of those together. And then I'm going to add a little bit of ink to kind of dirty them up a little bit and make them a little bit darker. And I'm using Distressed Oxide inks today. And we've got Gathering Twigs and Ripe Persimmon are the ones that we're using. And I'm going to use my grip mat from Simon Says Stamps to hold those in place for me while I do a little bit of ink blending. And I've just got a small brush. You don't need a whole bunch of ink, but you just want to dirty them up. I find that craft color is a little bit too light, but I don't want to do them both in dark. So this is kind of in the middle. So now we're going to make an orange. This was kind of cool. So there's 3 pieces that you have to cut out: the background, the center, and then all of those little pieces of orange. And I am going to add a little bit of ink blending to them with the Ripe Persimmon. And you need tweezers and a blending brush to do this because they're really, really tiny, so they're hard to hold on to. So the tweezers work really well to help you out, and they keep your fingers clean. Okay, so you're just going to do the outside edge of each of these little pieces, and I'm just kind of scribbling it on there. You don't want a line, so try and maybe go in circles sort of things so that you don't get a straight line. Okay, and you're going to do all 6 of the pieces. And then what you're going to do is that white piece has a little bit of an indent in it. It's embossed slightly, so it tells you where to put the pieces back in. So then you're just going to add a dab of glue to each one. And using your embellishment wand is a really easy way to do this for picking up those little tiny pieces. Unless you get glue on the end of your wand, in which case you want to clean that off. Okay, and you want to try and get them on there as straight as possible with a little bit of white space in between each one. And there we go. I'm just going to adjust that one. And I'm going to let this dry for a minute, and then we're going to add a bit of ink. So I'm going to pop that orange together, a little bit of glue on one of the spots, and then lay the other piece over top. Okay. Making sure it's kind of on there and stuck well, and all the pieces are stuck well. Then I'm going to stick it down to my grip mat, and I'm going to add a little bit of ink. So a little bit more of the persimmon just around the edges. And that comes into the white a little bit just to dirty it up. And then again, we're switching over to the gathering twigs, and I'm going to dirty up the edges because you notice when you dry your oranges that they turn a little bit darker in color. So this is kind of how to get that. And then I add a little bit of grunge to the center of it as well, so it's not quite so white. There we go. My little orange is all finished. Now we're going to do some berry stems. So I cut the berry stems out of the dark brown, and then I've got red berries. And again, using my embellishment wand to pick up the pieces and get them in there. There is a little hole in each of these berries, so you will get a little bit of glue on the end of your embellishment wand. So you want to make sure you clean that off every once in a while. Otherwise, it gets a little difficult to move things around. And the tweezers also come in handy because they're such little pieces. I don't worry too much about getting them on there straight because, you know, in nature, they're not always perfect, especially in the winter. And you need 3 of these for the star. I do make some extra ones because I did a really cool country snowman one of these, and I'll show you at the very end. And I used some of these greeneries and foliage around the snowman and the bunnies and the bird feeder just to add some color and some depth to the card. I think I almost like it better than the star. Okay, so I'm adding little pieces of foam tape to the back of my bow, and then I'm going to set that aside for a second. First thing we're going to do is we have 5 of these, let's call them ferns. Okay, and we're going to glue those down, and they go on the seams in between the filigree. And you're going to lie those flat. We've got lots of layers to do here, and you don't want to pay extra postage, so you want to make sure that everything's as flat as possible. Next thing, we're going to add the berries, the berry branches, and there's 3 of those. And I'm positioning those the way I am because I'm going to be adding the pine cones, so I need space for that as well. Next, we're going to add our bow to the center. And then I have die cut some of the little hollies and a couple of the extra berries. And so I'm going to put 3 holly leaves in the center, and those help to hide some of my little bald spots in the background. Okay, embellishing is a great time to hide your mistakes, I have found. Adding 3 little dots of glue in the center, and now we're going to add the 3 red berries. Okay, just like that. It's pretty the way it is, but there's a few more things we're going to add. So pine cones, I'm adding a piece of foam tape on the back of each one of those, and then we're going to tuck them mostly underneath the bow. Okay, so just try and squiggle those in right underneath on either side, kind of on the same angles. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the orange, but I'm going to add a little bit of glue at the bottom as well because I want it tilted up, and I'm sticking that at the top. Okay, so now we're going to add this to our card. So the first thing we're going to do is snip off the overhang. And I'm using Spellbinders no stick scissors. They're perfect for things like this. So our card base is ready to go. It folds flat both ways. Yay! So we're going to add our sentiment. And again, I use the July 2025 Festive Press. And I actually foiled it with the press, and I used a Spectrum Prism foil, which is absolutely gorgeous, and I'll show it to you just in a sec. So I'm centering that at the bottom and using the dots on the bridge to kind of line everything up and make it nice and even. Okay, so here's the better press plate. There's the pieces that I used. And here is the beautiful foil that I used. Isn't it gorgeous? It's got a kind of a Aurora Borealis finish to it, which is really pretty. It's really glimmery. Okay, so that's our sentiment at the bottom of our card. So now we're going to add our star, and it's going to fit just like this, and you only need to glue it in 2 spots on those 2 top arms. So one there and one there. So you're going to add as much glue as you can get onto that tip, and then kind of holding your tongue the right way, you're going to line up one side and then the other. So I'm lining up the scallops at the bottom, and then I'm also trying to get an equal amount of the star arm on either side of my card. And I'm just going to let that dry. Okay, and there we go. We got our dots that are all matchy-matchy. We got our blues that are all matchy-matchy. And when we fold this flat, it fits inside our A2 card. So cool. I love making these. Okay, so here's my cowboy. Now, isn't this cute? So this is the Country Snowman dies, and these are just absolutely genius. I love this set. And so I use polka dotted pattern paper in the background to make it look like snow. And we've got the little rabbit, and I did the sentiment in red. And then, as I said, we used some of the embellishments from the star to add some greenery into the background just to add some interest. And there's 2 little cardinals, and there's a bird feeder. It's just really, really sweet. So here's a different version of the star, and this time I used the dot dies when I was doing my cutting out. So remember back in the beginning I showed you these guys that there's 2 different styles. This is the dot one, and it goes well with that same pattern paper. And the pattern paper is also from Spellbinders, and I have it tagged over on my blog under the supplies that I used. Here's one in pink and red, and then here's where I'm talking about using the embossing folder. So this is the Country Christmas embossing folder, and I took a white piece of cardstock, and it was 4 by 6 3/4, and cut up my pieces the same as I did with the pattern paper, and then popped it inside the embossing folder, lined them up all nice and straight, embossed, and then attach them to the card. So that's a nice variation. If you don't have a lot of pattern paper or you like a nice white background, that's the solution. I love this one, done in the teals. That's my second favorite card. Okay, so here's all the cards. I had a lot of fun making these. As I said, I think this little cowboy is my favorite. Maybe because the Calgary Stampede was just on and we've had lots of cowboys around lately. I don't know. I just think it's cute. And then here's my second favorite, the little blue guy. I like Christmas red and teal together. Okay, so I have a giveaway. I have 2 giveaways. If you subscribe and leave a comment here on my YouTube channel, you are going to be entered to win 2 of these cards. Same thing over on Instagram. You can pop over to my Instagram account, subscribe, leave me a comment, and I am going to do 2 card draw over there as well. And so this is going live on July the 15th. I'm going to do the draw on July the 20th, and I will let everybody know on my blog, plus I'll notify the winners. So thank you so much for visiting me today. Everything I used is listed underneath this video. There's also a link over to my blog, and there's a free PDF download for you for all of the cutting instructions. Thanks so much, and toodles!